thank you for spending your lunch break coming to listen to this Tech Talk. For those of you who do not know me, as Dirk said, my name is Jared. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about retrospectives and how to make yours more effective. Retrospectives is that meeting. It's one of two that we do every week, the other one being IPM, where we put ourselves into a room and we look at each other, we talk about how the previous iteration went, how we can make the next one better. So I gave you a little summary, a high-level summary of why we do retrospectives. But it's interesting, like depending on whom you speak to about why we do agile retrospectives, the emphasis can be a little bit different. One that I hear a lot in just the last 2 years of being here and in doing the research for this talk is a retrospective is a platform to essentially make sure that everyone who contributes to the team has an opportunity to speak. So it's scheduled. We do it every single week. It's one of only 2 meetings that we dedicate that time to. And we make sure that everyone has a platform to speak. That's why we give everyone the markers, everyone can add topics, everyone's input's heard. A lot of people will say that this is the most important aspect of retro. This is how we get the most value out of it. Another thing that I have seen teams leverage retrospectives as around here, and also again, other places as well, is that they are natural status updates for product owners. So not only are we talking about how to improve and reflecting on the week, but it's a natural time for product owners, people who are at an arm's length away from the team, to come in and get a perspective on how things are going. And it's natural because, again, the happies, the mehs, the sads, it really serves as a nice little highlight reel for how the previous iteration went and can give someone a sense for how the project is going as a whole. Now, I'm not denying that there's value to these things. I'm not denying that retrospective can serve these purposes and that it does for many projects. However, I am here today to make the argument that these are ancillary to the real value. The real value of retrospectives, the reason why we do them, is to influence positively the team's future behavior. That is the reason that we do retrospectives. If retrospectives did not serve the purpose of giving you that period of time to adjust, formulate an adjustment plan, and then talk about how you're going to do it, we would not do them. We would not spend that hour every single week. So remember that. And again, I am not denying that those other 2 bullet points have value. However, focusing on those is kind of like me saying that I took a 10-hour flight to Japan last October because I wanted to see what the Pacific Ocean looks like when it's super tiny. Or saying that I bake cheesecakes because I think it's really fun to crack eggs. Or saying that I buy candles because I think it's so fun to light matches. Although I'm definitely guilty of that from time to time. The purpose of the actual retrospective, and I'm going to say this probably 20 or 30 more times throughout this talk, is to positively influence future behavior. And to whatever extent you feel a little bit of pain around your retrospectives, a little bit of, is this really worth spending this time going into it? You're probably feeling the pain of retrospectives that are not totally focused on the team's future behavior. So, I have today 9 action items for you that you can take away right now and go start implementing on your teams that will give you a higher probability to generate higher quality action items, give you a higher probability of executing on those action items consistently, and therefore giving you a higher probability of positively influencing the team's future behavior. Positively influencing so that we can be more effective at delivering software, which is the goal. Action item number 1. Invite all everyday members of the team. All everyday members of the team. Everyone whose behaviors have direct impact on the performance of the team should be part of the retrospective. They should be part of the conversation for how can we change our behavior such that we can deliver more effectively in the next iteration. They need to all be part of it because we need to, as a team, come up with both the problems and pains, recognize them together, and also, this is the key, we need to come up with the solutions together. If a team does not come up with the solutions all together, the chances of them actually following through on those changes drops dramatically. The team has to feel that ownership. Now, there is a corollary to this. Invite all everyday members of the team. Invite only everyday members of the team. Now, I've been on teams before where we would basically, the retrospective would just be this blast out to everyone who's even a little bit involved with the project. Again, maybe those product owners who are at an arm's length. Those folks, I recommend, should not be invited to the retrospective. Now, I am not recommending that you shut out product owners by any means. That is one of the most dangerous things that you can do if you're running a software team, is shut out the product owners and keep and cut off those lines of communication. What I am recommending, however, is that if you do have product owners who are not part of the everyday performance of the team at your retrospectives, think about how you can refocus the retrospective on just those whose behavior, again, is directly influencing the performance of the team, and get the information to those product owners in some other way, whether it's you throw a 30-minute meeting on the calendar every week that happens outside of retrospective, and give those product owners updates that could even include, here's what we talked about in retrospective. That's going to be a much more effective way to deliver. And again, all of this is driving at what the purpose of retrospective is, which is altogether positively influencing the behaviors of each individual on the team. So, invite all everyday members of the team. Action item number 2, schedule retro for 4:30 p.m. I love this one. My current project actually does it, and that's where this action item came from because I think it's really effective. If you schedule retro for 4:30 p.m., that means that your retro ends at 5:30 p.m., which means you have 30 minutes left in your day before everyone goes home. Now, for most action items that you generate over the course of a retrospective, never are you going to have more energy or more context around actually executing on those action items than in the moments right after the retrospective. So my recommendation here is to make it a cultural thing that as soon as we step out of the room in retrospective, we immediately start looking at our action items and saying, what can we do right now? I especially recommend this if you have your retrospective on Friday, because there's nothing quite like a whole weekend to make people forget about the action items that they agreed to the previous Friday. Now, the whole purpose of this is to have a higher throughput of the action items. Essentially, have fewer action items where the next retro we say, oh, yeah, I didn't do that, sorry. If we can execute on a higher probability of our action items, as long as we believe that our action items are actually driving us towards more effective future behavior, then by definition, we are going to become more effective in the long run. So, schedule retro at 4:30 p.m. Action item number 3, use a shared documentation tool. Now, some teams that I've been a part of, we don't really have a place where we collect all the retro items. And this is something that you actually don't even necessarily see everywhere in research. I recommend that you use some kind of shared documentation tool. So my personal favorite is Trello. I've used it on most projects that I've been on here at Pivotal. It's really, really effective. It's really easy to get into a nice flow, and it's really easy to archive all the action items, exactly the things that we want to use it for. My very first project, we used a Google Spreadsheet, which is great too. Like, you can have essentially, like, within the whole workbook, you can have a sheet for every single retrospective, and you can just date them, and it just goes back, and you have this nice archival thing to it. But it doesn't have to be electronic. The key here is that it's just something that everyone has read access to, so visibility into, and write access to, so the ability to own and change it. So if your thing is a corkboard with pins and little sticky notes that look like cats, do that. Do whatever it is that is going to work for your team. But have some place where you can collect all of the content that goes into the retrospective. If you have some place that you are collecting all of that content and have the ability to easily review it, then the retrospective becomes a much more effective tool for positively influencing the future behavior of the team. Encouraging folks to do more of what is good for your software team and less of what is bad for your software team. Again, anything that grants everyone read and write access will work. Get creative if Trello and Google Spreadsheets don't work. So, use a shared documentation tool. Action item number 4, record your topics in advance. Now, when I say record your topics in advance, I mean before everyone walks into the room. Now, I know that for many folks here, I myself included, the way I first learned about retrospective was the experience of We all cram into the room together, and we spend the first 5 to 10 minutes. We go to the whiteboard, we draw up our happy, our meh, our sad, and then everyone grabs a marker and adds all their topics. And I understand why we do it that way. It's physical, it's collaborative, it gives you good feelies, it feels agile. We're waiting until the last possible moment to drive out the agenda of our meeting. I totally get why we do it. And I think that it's less effective than recording your topics in advance. Recording your topics in advance guarantees that every single little pain can be articulated. It gives us no chance to forget. And actually, that leads to something that I hear sometimes. Again, in research and just experience, I hear this. I have even said it before myself. If it's important, you'll remember it. If it is painful enough that we should devote some of our hour together at Retro to talk about it, you'll remember it when it comes time to write it on the board. This is just false. If this were true, then I would never forget my sister's birthday, and she would never forget mine. But I do, and she does. And I don't forget my sister's birthday sometimes because I don't love her, and she doesn't forget my birthday sometimes because she doesn't love me, I don't think. We're human. That's why we forget. Humans really don't have very good memory. If you think you do, you don't. I'm sorry. And it's okay that you don't, but acknowledge that. What humans are really good at is the generation of the action items, the generation of the things that we're going to talk about at Retro. It's perception. Perception in the moment of saying, like, this kind of sucks that we do things this way. I really would love to change it. Let's talk about that at Retro. In that moment, rather than trying to make a mental note to yourself, go to your documentation tool and put it in there. Computers are really good at remembering things that we tell them. I promise you that if you put something into Trello on Monday, it will be there on Friday when it comes time to talk about things at Retro. And one more thing about this. If it's important, you'll remember it. If your bar for dealing with things, for trying to address concerns, if your bar is that it has to be so painful that you can't forget it, it's time to lower the bar a little bit. Great software teams do not wait to address problems, to address pains, until they cannot ignore them anymore. They address them right away. They address them when the pains are small. They're aggressive. And oftentimes, when pains are small and minute, that is the cheapest time to address them. So, record your topics in advance. Don't let yourself forget them. If you feel that pain, it's important. And if you forget over the course of a couple days, you didn't forget it because it wasn't important. You forgot it because you're a person, and people forget things. So, record your topics in advance. Action item number 5. Insist on having an action item for every meh or sad retro topic. So, given that retrospectives are about positively influencing teams' future behavior, everything that we talk about must be giving people good feelings in some way. So, the happy column is there because we want to reinforce good behaviors. We want to keep doing the things that we feel like make us improve. So not necessarily any change there. But mehs or sads have this sort of painful twinge to them. There's some pain that makes you put it in the sad or the meh column. Try to come up with an action item to address that pain. I'll admit that I have been very guilty of this on past projects where we would have a retro, we would talk for 5 minutes about this super painful thing, and then there would just be this like awkward silence in the room, and then we would just kind of like cross it off and move on. Don't let yourselves do that. It's really tempting to do that, especially after those long 5-minute conversations, because sometimes those conversations can end up being emotionally charged. And the last thing that anyone wants to do is try to do the hard work of thinking of like, okay, how can we address this thing that's like, feels like it's way out of our control, and it's uncomfortable. And I understand that this can be really, really awkward, but I think that it's worth doing. So if you're the facilitator, at the end of your discussion about some sad, ask out loud something to along the lines of, are there any action items that address that? And then here's the important thing. Only move on when someone commits to the word no. Don't move on when someone says, I don't know. It doesn't really seem like it. If someone says something along the lines of that, you as the facilitator say, okay, does anyone else have any ideas about action items that we can get out of this? And certainly don't move on if there's just awkward silence in the room, which Happens a lot. I've been to a lot of retrospectives. I've seen that. Commit when someone actually says out loud, no, there's nothing we can do about that. Right? Even there's weirdness if you hear someone say that, because usually you can say, well, there's probably something we can do about that. And then it opens up a conversation, and suddenly we're all operating under the assumption that there is an action item, and now we're brainstorming. It's just a totally different mindset. And it will be really uncomfortable at first when you do this as a facilitator, because a lot of people won't be used to you insisting. Notice I use the word insist. But just keep doing it, and you'll end up generating more action items as a result. Action item number 6. If you really cannot come up with something, boot it to a parking lot. I would say that most retros I'm a part of have like 5 to 7 minutes at the end of it where we're just like, okay, you can have those 5 to 7 minutes back at the end of the day. If you are in retrospectives where you have a little bit of extra time at the end and you moved on from something without having an action item for it, that's pretty inexcusable. Start using that time. Start having a parking lot section in your retrospective where if we moved on from something, we can revisit it later when we have more time, giving us a higher probability of actually generating action items. And if we give ourselves higher probability of generating action items to positively influence the future behavior of the team, to make us do more of the good things and less of the bad things, then over time, we'll be more effective. Each of these action items is about giving us a better chance at positively influencing behavior. And for the length of a software project, which can be many, many years, that means that over the long run, you will be more effective. So action item number 6, use a parking lot where you can revisit things that you could not come up with action items on before. Action item number 7, post your last retro's action items in some visible place. So we did this near the end of AAA where we would have the action items up at every single stand-up, because we had a problem where people would just sort of forget to do them. And again, they forgot because they're human, and humans forget things. So put your action items someplace where everyone has access to them, everyone can see them, everyone is seeing them every day. And I would recommend that you would take it even a step further, and again, in your stand-up, take a couple minutes and just go through the action item list real quick. You don't even necessarily have to get status updates, just say them out loud. And if someone has finished their action item, they can say, yep, did that, we can cross it off, and you don't have to do it the next day. If you use a whiteboard for your stand-up, if you don't actually use technology, that works too. Have them somewhere where people can see them every single day. You want the action items from your previous retros to be a piece of the team's everyday discourse, because the purpose of retrospectives is to positively influence the future behavior of the team. And as long as we believe that the action items that we generate in retrospectives serve that purpose, it's worth talking about them every single day. If we talk about them every single day, that makes it more likely that we will implement them. And if we implement our action items over time, we will be more effective as long as we believe that we are generating good action items. So if you don't want to add any more time to your stand-up, if you say, Jared, my stand-up's already 25 minutes, please don't give me more things to do in it, then that's totally fine. Again, having a whiteboard that you roll over and you just have it sit in the middle of your team's area, or pin it to a Slack channel or anything. Think of some way that you can have these action items on people's minds all the time. Put your action items in a visible place, somewhere where everyone can see them. Action item number 8. Assign action items only to folks who are in the room. Again, I have experience of not doing this and feeling significant pain around that. Again, when I was on AAA, there was one person who worked on the client side. He was higher up. There were a lot of pains that we felt that he was the ideal choice to own action items. Unfortunately, he could only come to about 25% of the retros. And there were a lot of times where we would assign an action item to him when he wasn't in the room, and then, lo and behold, he would just never hear about them. And that's not his fault. We never communicated that to him. So I recommend not assigning action items to people in the room. If you're in a situation like what we were, it's not necessarily the case that we were wrong to turn to him for help in solving some of these action items, but the action item was not do X assigned to Guy who is not here. The action item should have been do X, assigned to Gaurav. Go tell Guy to either help you do X or make sure that you can see him face to face and let him know that we need X and get that prioritized on his list somehow. Assigning action items only to people in the room also reinforces the benefit of action item number 1, which is to have everyone whose behavior directly impacts the performance of the team. It reinforces that by saying, hey, we own the direction that this ship is going. Every single person in this room, we are all the ones that are responsible. It's our behavior that drives the success or the failure of this software team. It's no one else's. And so action item number 8, which is only assign action items to people who are actually in attendance of retrospective, is another thing that just reinforces that fact. So assign action items only to people in the room. Have your team own its own destiny. Finally, action item number 9, stop calling them retrospectives. Yeah, we're blowing the doors off this one. Retrospective is a backward-looking term. And yes, it's true that in the retrospectives, we reflect on the previous iterations. However, calling them retrospectives and focusing on the reflection puts the emphasis in the wrong place. Of everything that we do at Pivotal, the retrospective is the most agile thing, I argue. Retrospectives are where we talk about how things have gone and how we're going to change. It's a regular conversation about how our team changes and adapts. And we do that with action items, so tasks, and also team agreements, which I hear about a lot. We want to reinforce that wherever we can. And the language that we use around retrospectives now, in some ways, misses the mark. If retrospectives are about influencing our future behavior, why do they happen at the end of our iterations? Why are retrospectives not how we start iterations? Why are we not walking out of a retrospective with the changes in behavior that we're going to make already in hand, ready to start our iteration? And why is the noun for what we call this thing, if you look up in the dictionary, mean backward looking, essentially? Retrospective. If you're a retrospective person, you're reflective, right? Is there a better name that we have for them? I'll admit that my action item is to stop calling them retrospectives. I don't know what a better name for them is. I think alignment makes sense. Adjustment makes sense. I don't know what the connotations everyone has with those words. But at least those start to walk us in the direction of what we want the retrospective to be about, what we want this meeting to be about. It's a place where we can come together, assess how we're doing, and most importantly, decide how our behavior is going to change in the future to address whatever pains that we are feeling and to make ourselves more effective as a software team. So, action item number 9, consider not calling them retrospectives. So, to summarize, all of these action items are about driving home the purpose of retrospective in your minds and in your behavior, which is to positively influence the team's future behavior, to get the team doing more of the things that make it effective and less of the stuff that makes it ineffective, to address pains aggressively as early as possible, not when it's so apparent that we can't avoid it anymore. No matter what, if you feel like your retrospectives are ineffective, try to think of ways to refocus the conversation that happens in that room on the team's future behavior. All right, that's it. Questions?